My name is Scott Mitchell. I am excited to be here with you today. I am from the Silver River Museum, and today's museum mystery object is this thing right here. Now, if you had a chance to print your worksheet, you will see a little sketch of the object right there. But here is the real thing, and we're going to talk about what in the world is this thing for. I will describe it to you, and then we will talk about it and how it is important to Native Americans in Florida. So first of all, it has a handle made out of wood, and it has some rope, some twine, and it has a big piece of a seashell right here that's very sharp on the edge. And so we think this is a tool. It's got a very sharp cutting edge here, and it's shaped kind of like a hammer. But what would you use this for? Teachers, if your students have any ideas about what in the world this thing is for, send them to me in chat and we can talk about it. And then I'll give you the rest of the story in just a minute. So you guys think about how a Native American would have used this and what would it be for? Holding a snake. Well, no, it's a good guess, but that's not what it's used for. Think of it as a tool. And let's have some other ideas. It's not for holding snakes. I see some hands up. All right, Cora said Native Americans used this for hunting animals. Well, it possibly could be used for hunting animals, but you would have to get right close to the animal. And animals, a lot of them are pretty fast and they run away before you can get to them. So it's not for hunting animals, but that's a good guess too. Let's have one more idea, and then I'll tell you what this mystery object is for. All right, Natalie says it's used as a hammer, a boomerang, or to fix things. Natalie didn't say all that, but Natalie said it's used for a hammer. Natalie is the closest in her guess. It's not a hammer, but it is a tool, and it's used for cutting wood. Now, the name of this object is Adze, and that is spelled A-D-Z-E. It is an adze. So that's spelled A-D-Z-E, and an adze is used by wood carvers to shape wood. It's not used to cut down big trees. It's not like an axe. An adze is used to shape wood by chipping. If this is the piece of wood, you're using this sharp shell edge to chip pieces of wood away. So if you wanted to carve something like a bowl or a stool or a bow and arrow or carving a wooden mask for a ceremony or a canoe paddle or a dugout canoe, a wooden canoe, you would use an adze. Adzes are often used to hollow out wooden objects like bowls or dugout canoes. So this is an adze, and this is very important. This tool would have been used by Native Americans to create all kinds of other things. Think for just a minute. If you couldn't go to Lowe's or the mall or Target or Home Depot or Dick's Sporting Goods, you couldn't go any of those places to buy things you needed, or the grocery store. You had to make all of your own tools, but you had to make them from things you would find in nature. So what kind of things do you find in nature? They did not have metal or plastic or glass. So they would have found things like wood. What else? Remember what this was? Shell. If you said shell, that's right. This is rope. You could make this from certain types of bark from trees or plant fibers. Leather, antler, clay to make pottery. So the Native Americans had to make all their own tools. The adze was an important tool because you could make other things with it. So I'm going to show you all. I've got a screen share here. We're going to show you a little slideshow, and I want to show you some pictures of adzes and people using adzes. And I think this will be kind of a little bit better way to kind of show you how these tools were used. Okay, so there's my drawing of the adze on the left. Here's a real photograph, a photograph of a real adze on the right. And you can see it's made the same way. It has the handle. the cordage or the rope holding on the shell blade. Now, because this is old, the shell is kind of dirty. And this is the sharp end down here. So that's a real adze. Now here is a group of photos that show different kind of adze. This one has a stone cutting edge. So does this one. And these have shells. Here's an adze being used to carve a wooden bowl. You can see the bowl is starting to take shape there. And then this is a big adze with, this actually has a steel cutting edge, but look what they're doing. They're carving out an entire log to make a dugout canoe. So remember I said that you could use a tool like an adze to hollow out wooden things. Well, canoes were very important because guess what? They didn't have cars or airplanes or trains back in the prehistoric period of Florida. Native Americans like Timucuan Indians, those were the Native Americans that lived around Marion County in north central Florida. They would have had to use dugout canoes or they could walk. That was your two choices for getting around. All right. This is an exciting photo. Well, it's actually two photos. These are artifacts that are in the Canoe Exhibit at the Silver River Museum. And so this is a case over here on the left, and it has 3 adzes there. And then it has all these cutting bits. These are the shell cutting edges, and there's some stone ones. So this shows kind of the different ways that people would make adzes. And if you look closely, these handles are actually made out of bone. They're put together a little bit differently than the one I had, but it's the same tool. It's the same idea. Now, here's that same adze, that picture again. This is a close-up of the shell cutting points that would be attached to the wooden handle. And these are some other shell tools. In Florida, the hardest and sharpest thing that a Native American could find was either stone or shell. So a lot of tools are made from stone and shells. This is an interesting photo. These are, this is a model of Native Americans, probably Timucuan Indians. Before the first Spanish arrived, they're using stone and shell tools. And look what they've done. They've cut down a tree and they are shaping it into a canoe, but look closely. Do you see these little orange specks here? What do you think's going on there? What's the easiest way to hollow out a canoe? You can use fire. So these are actually wood embers. They're burning the wood, the middle of the tree out. So you would burn it, then you might pour water on it and you would chip out the charcoal, and then you might burn it some more and then put it out, chip out the charcoal. So the native boat builders would use fire and stone and shell tools. This is also in the canoe wing at the Silver River Museum. And this is a model that shows what one of those big trees would have looked like as it was being turned into a canoe. And you can see an adze right there in the middle. And you can see where they've burned out the inside of the tree. Remember, they didn't have chainsaws and steel axes and things like that. So they had to use tools that they made, and they would use fire to help them. Here are a couple of Native Americans. I think this is up north, maybe in Massachusetts or someplace. And this is a modern photograph, but these two fellows are, they're dressed in old time Native American clothes, probably for educational purposes. And look what they're doing. They have a log and they are actually burning. You can see the flames. They've added little twigs and sticks. They're burning the inside of the log out to make a dugout canoe. So that's what it would look like if you were actually doing it. Now, up near Gainesville, there is a lake called Noonan's Lake or Lake Pithlachaco. That's the Indian name for it. And years ago, there was a drought, which means that there wasn't enough water, that it didn't rain, and the lakes started to dry up. And when the lake dried up enough, there were big sections of it that used to be underwater that you could walk out, and now it was just mud. And some students from a high school in Gainesville, I think it was Eastside High School, they went for an environmental science class. They went on a field trip to the lake, and they're walking around looking at bugs and birds and things. And they started to see the remnants or the remains of ancient canoes poking out of the lake bed because the lake had practically dried up. And when they called the archaeologists went to the lake, and guess what they found? They found 101 canoes or pieces of canoes. And these were canoes that were used by prehistoric Indians that had been at the bottom of the lake, and the lake dried up, and now here they were. And so they figured out how old these canoes were. They went all the way back to 5,000 years old. That's how old they were. And it's the biggest group of prehistoric canoes that have ever been found in one place anywhere. And so this is a little exhibit in the museum that talks about that place, Lake Pithlachaco, or Noonan's Lake. It's just up in Gainesville. It's not very far from Ocala. Now here's a photo of a canoe builder. And I think this is out in British Columbia or Alaska. This is out on the West Coast, and they have really big trees out there. And the Native Americans will build dugout canoes that they would actually take out into the ocean. So this is a large Northwest Coast canoe. Now here is a great photo. This is a canoe builder, and this is probably New Guinea or possibly Africa. It looks like it might be New Guinea, but look what he's doing. He's got an adze, and he's putting the finishing touches on his canoe. Now, he lives in a place where there are probably not many roads, and the best way to get around is a boat, okay? Because you can bring lots of stuff. You can bring your friends and your family, and you can go collect food, or you can go to other villages and trade and barter for things. But look at this photograph. If you look closely, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 canoes, plus the one he's working on. So these are almost like cars to these people. This is how they get around. Now, remember I said the prehistoric Native Americans did not have cars or airplanes or bicycles or trains or any of that stuff. They had to either walk or get in a canoe and travel. And so you could take your family, your brother, your sister, whoever, a bunch of stuff. You could go fishing, you could go collecting food, you could go travel, and a canoe was the way to go. It was an easier way to go where you could bring lots of things. So you can see this little family here in their canoe, and they're traveling right along. And guess what, folks? In Florida, we have lots and lots of rivers, okay? So this red dot is pretty much where the Silver River Museum is in Ocala. And I put that here to show you all you could go a long way with a canoe on a river. Look at this river here. This is called the Ocklawaha River. So you could actually, where the glass bottom boats are, we could get in canoes, and we could go down the Silver River to the Ocklawaha, and then up the Ocklawaha River to the St. John's. And you could take the St. John's River all the way to Jacksonville, to the beach, to the Atlantic Ocean, and never even get out of the boat. So that's an example of a river being like a highway. And you can see these other rivers, they go all over the state, really. And if you know where you're going, you can actually use these rivers as highways and trade routes. And that's just what the Native Americans did. So if you're over in Dunellen, for instance, on the west side of the Marion County, you can get in the Withlacoochee in your canoe, and you could go all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. Or if you're in Yankeetown, you could get in a canoe and go along the coast, and then you could, so if you're in Yankeetown, you could go, it's over on the Gulf Coast, you could go up the Gulf Coast if the waves weren't too rough, and then you could go up the Swanee River all the way up into Georgia. So that's how people traveled. Now I've got another interesting thing to show you. Where are we? Okay, I want to show you the Canoe Exhibit, and then I want you to ask me some questions about the Adze. So at the Silver River Museum, we have a special room that has all kinds of information and artifacts about Native American dugout canoes. And teachers, if you go to the Silver River Museum website, silverrivermuseum.com, there are these virtual reality tours of all of our exhibit rooms and also our Pioneer Village, the old buildings. In fact, you can see inside each building. But look, this is a prehistoric Timucuan canoe. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. There we go. And if you press the little button, it tells you all about it, right? You can read that about each item. But this is inside the Canoe Exhibit at the Silver River Museum. This is a microscope that scientists use to try to figure out what kind of wood the canoes are made from. So this is a microscope you can try out for yourself. Here's another canoe back here. These are items that Native Americans would trade, and they would carry these things around in canoes. There's the exhibit on Noonan's Lake, or Lake Pithlachaco up by Gainesville, where they found all the ancient canoes in the mud. Then this case has interesting artifacts that Native Americans would use to get food, like fishing artifacts, and they would use canoes to go fishing. So that's just a little sneak peek at our canoe exhibit. And if you want to come to the Silver River Museum, it's open every weekend. And we also have a big festival coming up November 13th and 14th. And that's a good time to come out as well. So that's our museum mystery object for today. The Adze. Oh, I forgot one more thing. I wanted to show you, this is a shell, a sharp shell cutting piece that goes in the Adze. But I want to show you kind of how they would get this thing. They would take a piece of a seashell, right? So they get a seashell from the beach, and then they would chop with a stone axe, probably. They would chop the shell up, and they would take a piece of the shell and then grind it into the proper shape with limestone or sandstone. And it has a sharp edge here, kind of like a knife. And this is what they would put in the adze handle. They also would make stone cutting pieces that you could put in a handle to chop wood and to cut wood. So those are some examples of special wood carving tools. So that's the museum mystery object for today. And do you all have questions for me about the Adze, or about the canoe exhibit, or Native American canoes, or anything about prehistoric Native Americans in Florida? I would be happy to try to answer your questions. So teachers, if your students have questions, just send them to me in chat, and then we can share them with everybody. I see some hands going up. That's a good thing. Okay, so the first question I have is, how long are the axes? So axes are used to cut trees down, and they usually have a much longer handle, like a baseball bat, about that long. And the adze, they have a much shorter handle because you're working right close to you'll have the piece of wood close to you, and you're not swinging it, putting so much power in to cut the tree down. You're just trying to chip the wood out to hollow out the canoe or the wooden bowl. So the length of the handle depends on the tool. Axes have longer handles, and adzes usually have shorter handles, not always. Okay, so how old is this adze? This is not an old one. This is actually a new one that was made by a museum person, and it's made just like the old ones. It's pretty much an exact copy, and we made it so that we could do show and tell with it. We wouldn't want to bring an ancient one because they're worth a lot of money, and they might be fragile. They might break if you drop it. So this is a new one that's made just like the old ones for lessons. Okay. Can you ride in the canoe in the museum? That's a good question. We can't really ride in the canoes at the museum, but there is a canoe there that you can sit in and have your photo taken, which is kind of fun. Or if you go to Silver Springs, where the glass bottom boats are, with your family, you can actually rent canoes and kayaks over there to try it out yourself. But we can't ride the canoes in the actual museum. But remember, there is one you can sit in and have your photo taken. Okay, how long were the boats? That's a great question. The boats were various different sizes, and some of them would have been really big, where they would carry lots of people. longer than a car, and others would have been, only big enough for maybe 2 or 3 people. So they're kind of like our cars today. You have little small 2-seater cars, almost like little sports cars, and then you have big giant, pickup trucks that can carry lots of people and haul lots of stuff. The canoes were the same way. They had big, medium, and small canoes. Okay. Athena wants to know what the adze is made from. Well, we have a wooden handle. We will have either a shell or a stone cutting piece, right? They could make the cutting piece out of either shell or stone. And then we have rope or leather holding it all together here. So it has 3 materials, either shell or stone, rope, and wood. Okay, did they hunt with the axe or adze? I don't think so. I think that these were mostly just woodworking tools. And, wood carvers still use these tools today, but they're modern and they have metal cutting bits or blades. Okay, how big were the seashells? Well, there's one of them right there. This is called a whelk shell. It's kind of like a conch shell. And they would get a little bit bigger than this, but this is about an average size for one. Now, the good part is you could eat the snail that came out of the shell, because remember, you couldn't go to the grocery store. So you would eat the snail, you would fry it up and make a snail sandwich, and then you could make some tools out of the shell. So this was a really good thing if you could find it. Okay, Parker wants to know what other use the adze besides carving boats. Well, carving bowls, carving bows and arrows, carving stools, carving wooden masks, carving anything out of wood. Let's see. We have some great questions. How long ago did the lake dry up? I think it was about 21 years ago. I believe it was the year 2000. It was a very, very dry year, and the lake didn't dry up completely, but the water just kind of went to the middle of the lake and the edges dried up, and that's where they found those ancient canoes. How did they make the big tree go down so that they could carve a boat? From Dakota. That's a great question, Dakota. Remember, they didn't have chainsaws or steel axes, so they would use axes with stone cutting edges, and they would also use fire. They would build a fire around the bottom of the tree, and it might take them a few days to cut down a really big tree, but that's how they did it. Okay, what type of wood was the adze made from? I'm pretty sure this is oak, which is really hard, and it can take a lot of punishment using it as a tool handle. So hardwoods like oak or hickory. Okay, Amara wants to know how they assemble the adze. Well, that's a neat thing, because you have to have something to carve this. You need a tool to make this tool, right? So they would probably use things like sharp pieces of flint or chert to carve the wood and to shape the wood, and also the shell. So they would use other tools to make this adze. Okay, what kind of trees did they use for the boats? I'm glad you asked. The prehistoric Native Americans in Florida almost always used pine trees, because have you ever gotten that pine sap on you? Like you lean up against a pine tree and then you got sticky stuff all over your hand. It's almost like glue and it smells like pine trees. That's called pine sap or pine rosin, and it burns. So the inside of the tree is full of pine sap. And if you put fire on the pine log, you can burn the inside of that pine log out pretty easily. So for instance, all of those 101 boats that they found at Noonan's Lake, I think almost all of them were made out of pine trees. Now, the Seminole Indians, who were later in time, and they actually had steel tools, they would use cypress trees to make their canoes, because they didn't have to burn the inside of the tree out like the prehistoric Native Americans did. So modern Native Americans use cypress in Florida. Prehistoric Native Americans used pine because they really had to rely on fire to help them to hollow out those logs. These are great questions. All right, do we have any other questions? And remember, if you want to see those exhibits at the Silver River Museum, you can go on the weekend with your family. It's open every Saturday and Sunday. And teachers, remember, on the website, the Silver River Museum website, we have those virtual tours for all of the buildings, and you can show your students those on the computer. Okay, we got one more question. Did they, well, no, yep, one more question. Did they ever use the sap for glue to make the tools from Matthew? Yes, they did. They would take pine sap and maybe mix it with some other things like charcoal or ash from a wood fire. And they would actually put that on. So you would put some of that glue on the shell piece. You would glue the shell piece onto the wooden handle, and then you would wrap it with the rope to hold it on there extra tight. So they did make glue from that sticky pine sap. Yes, yes, they did. All right, and last question, maybe the last question. How long did it take to make a boat? Well, that depends on how many people you had helping you and how large the boat was. I've never made a dugout canoe, but I think it's a lot of work. And I bet if you had, 10 or 12 people, it would probably take you a week or two working every day to make a boat. I've also been told by a Seminole friend of mine that her grandfather used to make dugout canoes. Her name is Mary Jean Kunis, and her great-grandfather was Charlie Cypress. He was a very famous canoe carver. And Mrs. Kunis told me that her great-grandfather, they would always cut down a big cypress tree in the winter in a place that was near water. And they would work on the canoe through the winter while it was nice and cool and there weren't too many mosquitoes. And then in the summer, when the rains came and the area they were in would get wet and they would be close to a river or a swamp, they could float the canoe off into the swamp that way. But I think it would take a few weeks at least to make a canoe because you have to do everything by hand. All right, do we have other questions? You guys are asking me wonderful questions. I appreciate you joining me today. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another museum mystery object. So I hope you join me in a couple weeks. But if we don't have any more questions, we will say goodbye and let you guys get back to your classwork. Teachers, if you think of questions after a Zoom, you can always email me at the Silver River Museum. I'm easy to find. And remember that the museum is open on weekends, and we have these virtual reality tours on the museum website. And we're hoping we can start seeing students again pretty soon for field trips. We're waiting for that approval. All right, thank you all for joining me. And I will see you again soon, I hope. And you guys have a great rest of the day. And remember, today's museum mystery object was an adze. Goodbye.